All right, you are listening to More About Storytelling, the very first episode. In today's episode, we'll be interviewing my best literary friend, Astra Crompton. I'll be talking about Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein movie and whatever else may come to mind before the end of this show. So let's go. Once upon a time.
In a galaxy far, far away.
It was a dark and stormy night.
Gather round, my friends. Let me tell you a story. All right. So, yeah, the other day I'm sitting here and I was flipping through Netflix, doing the usual, what do I want to watch before I go to bed? And couldn't find anything on Netflix. So I jumped over to Plex and I noticed that the new Frankenstein by Guillermo del Toro was on there. So, it's a long watch, 2.5 hours. It was about 8:30. I figured, why not? I mean, it'll be a late night, but it's something I've been wanting to see. So I threw it on, and I got to tell you, I was enthralled. Like it was a great movie. It's been a long time since I've seen a movie I enjoyed that much. So naturally, after it was over, I looked up a little bit about how the movie was made, and I was very thrilled to find that all of the sets were real. They were actually built. They were real things. There's no CGI or any of that kind of stuff for the environmental sets. And Guillermo del Toro said specifically that he wanted it to feel like a lived-in world. He wanted the complexity, the texture, the touch, taste, and feel of all of these set pieces, and that really impressed me, especially considering Frankenstein's lab and how cool it was, the way that all of his macabre experimentation that led up to the creation of Adam, and all that, and like that breaking the story down into parts the way he did, where it's part of Victor Frankenstein telling his story to the ship captain, and part of Adam, his creation, telling his side of the story and what he went through. Very human story, and I really liked it. So if you get a chance, watch the show. It was great. I really enjoyed it. It makes me want to go back and read Mary Shelley's work again. It's been a long time, and it's sad that I can't comment on how many deviations from her original work the movie took, because I don't really remember the original work very well. But the movie was worth it. The movie was a great show. The effects were fantastic, and I mean Oscar Isaac. He's got to be one of my favorite actors in Hollywood. I just love pretty much everything he does. He's a great character actor. So check that one out. So yeah, so welcome to my show. This is more about storytelling, episode number one, where I'm going to explore my passion for storytelling in all of its forms. So we're going to be talking about movies, we're going to be talking about video games, we're going to be talking about animation and comic books, and of course novels and writing. And I'm going to be bringing on guests to interview. And what better guest for me to bring on than my literary best friend, Astra Crompton. Now, I met Astra, back in my Navy days. I still was serving, still wearing the uniform, and I'd gone to a comic convention with a friend of mine just to help him out. It was the first Comic Con I'd ever been to in my life, and Astra had the table next to him, and we hit it off and became best friends. And I'd always been writing. I'd been a writer ever since I was a kid, and a bit of an artist and a cosplayer, but it was always amateur, and I never ever thought of it more than simply a hobby until Astra came into my life. And in 2012, when I had to leave Nerdcore Entertainment and return to Victoria, it was Astra who convinced me to go to the first Double Dog Dare open mic for authors with Philodith Publishing in Victoria. And Astra's influence was a direct result for me going down that path. It was her guidance, her inspiration that led me to self-publishing Sunlight Prints. So without further ado, we will jump into our first interview with my best friend, Astra Crompton. All right. Hello, Astra Crompton, my bestest friend in the literary world. Welcome to my brand new podcast. It 100% makes sense that you're number one and first to go. So, hi, welcome.
Hi. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to do this with you. And, we always have a great time talking about stories. So this seems like a perfect avenue to do so.
Yeah, it just totally makes sense, doesn't it? And it's like I said to you before we started recording, too, is like, when I first met you, indie publishing and all that wasn't really on my radar. I've always been a writer and a storyteller, but it was you that convinced me to go to Zoe Duff's Double Dog Dare from
Hmm.
publishing, and it was you who convinced me to self-publish Sunlight Prince. So the world owes you giving me the courage. So it makes sense that you're my first interview here too.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and self publishing has come such a long way too since then, like just from a quality perspective, but also from an accessibility perspective. So it's definitely been a learning curve for both of us, but I'm really proud of, how far we both come. Like it's been really exciting to kind of do this in tandem together over the years.
Oh yeah, no kidding. Yeah, because I think when we both started back in the early 2000s, that you were still doing the Indiegogo stuff to
Yeah.
raise money, right? That was with
Hmm.
Weaponry and Angel
Yeah.
Down and your amazing comics.
Yeah, I never ended up finishing Angel Down in true fashion. It was meant to be a short project, and then I had, too many other projects on the go, so I had to shelve it. So Angel Down is definitely one I'd like to come back to. Hopefully someday. It's not actually that much longer to finish it, but my focus now is definitely more on the novel side of things. I actually did up a list just a couple of days ago to see, what novels do I have that are in some form of having been started. So whether they're drafted but need editing, or whether they're, just in the beginning stages of drafting. And there's like 25 novels on my plate to do. So,
Why am I
I've
not surprised?
right. So it's that case at this point where I'm like, oh, I've got to get on this, or I'm not going to get them done in my lifetime. So
So, for the listeners who don't know my bestest friend Astra, this woman is, for lack of a better way to put it, a creative powerhouse. Like she is a fountain of creation, the likes of which I have rarely ever encountered in all of my exploration of the creative world. Like, yeah, like Astra, you're not just a writer; you're an artist.
hmm
You make your own clothing.
yeah, I'm actually
um,
sewing as we speak.
Shocking. Shocking. What else do you do? Like, I know we did a lot of singing and stuff together. Do you play any
Yeah.
other instruments?
I don't, and my voice has gotten super rusty. I did voice lessons a few years back just because I was hoping to kind of brush some of the rust off, and I learned that a lot of my issues with tempo stem from my ADHD. I actually can't hear or feel tempo at all.
Wow.
So yeah, it kind of like put a damper on my like enthusiasm for singing in any sort of like capacity. So now I'm kind of like shy about it and just sing along to my music while I'm working. But for the
Uh,
most part, my focus has really honed on my writing, my illustrations, and then the sewing is like definitely become more of like an outlet and a passion piece. I'm one of those people who like I have never experienced writer's block. It's not something that I have, and I understand it. I've worked with people who have it. But for me, I think part of the reason I don't have it is because I have so many different artistic outlets. So if I I'm still brainstorming a writing bit, then I can switch to illustration, or I can switch to sewing, and I'm still percolating and thinking about the story while I'm doing those other things, and works like a charm.
right. That's fantastic. And on the illustration front, you've done some children's books recently too, right?
Yeah, I haven't written any children's books. I do have a middle grade book that I wrote, but for my children's books, I specifically do illustrations for other people. So I've
Right.
paired up with a couple of authors. So the first one was Marcia Nelson Petty. That one's The Adventures of Rainbow Mouse. And then this year, I finished the illustrations for Dee Lambert's Best Buddies, which is really cute little cats. So yeah, it's not something that I actively seek out, but every now and then it's the right project at the right time, and it's always a nice break to do something that's kind of light and fluffy because a lot of my
Yeah.
stuff stuff is adults. I do, illustrations and writing for games as well, and so a lot of the commission work I've been doing the last 5 years or so has been vampires and changelings and werewolves, and so it's kind of a darker content. So
Just right into that monster world, eh?
yeah, exactly, which I
So
love. But yeah, it's nice to have a break every now and then.
So tell me something. Weaponry,
Yeah.
the web, the correct me if I'm not saying this right, but it was an LGBTQ focused web comic about pirates,
Yeah.
correct?
Yeah, it was, and a really interesting project because it was choose your own adventure, and so at the end of each chapter, I had 3 protagonists who were my POV characters, and I would write one kind of continuation for the next chapter from the perspective of each of those characters, and the audience got to vote on whose story they wanted, and that might be based on who their favorite POV character was. It might be based on what events might happen in that person's, like, kind of teased next chapter peekaboo.
Hmm.
And it was very much came down to popular vote. But yeah, I was younger when I did it. I didn't know as much about the industry. There are definitely a lot of things that I would do differently now. But I'm still proud of myself because it was 10 years of doing it. And I did
Yeah,
manage to finish the story. So yeah, it was a big undertaking. I definitely bit off more than I could chew, but I saw it to the end, and that's really all
yeah.
you can ask.
That was one of the things I made a point of trying to remember to ask you about because I remember you being very proud of weaponry, and I remember when I was living in Victoria still, and we were seeing each other on a much more regular basis. I remember it being a very successful thing. Like you had a lot of followers and stuff.
Well, I don't think I ever had like a large following because I kind of got cold feet with it. It because it dealt with some kind of taboo subject matter. I mean, they were pirates, they weren't good people, and they did a lot of awful things. And it was fantasy, but it was inspired by the golden age of piracy and a few other kind of key time periods that I mashed together. And so because of that, it wasn't a direct analog of Earth, but it definitely had some inspirations of specific cultural pieces and specific historical moments. And some of those are difficult and they definitely don't play well with like a modern dialogue of how we would identify sexuality, of how we would
Oh,
identify,
sure.
consent. And so because they were difficult topics, I would try and promote the comic when I was doing it, with the different hosting services that I was using for the webcomic portion. And I would always get to a point where I would, be like, oh, what if, what if people don't understand my intention? What if people don't like, take this the wrong way? And so I would kind of shy away from it and I would, stop promoting it. And so things would kind of drop off again. So it was very much this yo-yo back and forth for it. And at this point, I've pulled the comics; they're not available for sale anymore. Um,
Oh,
and yeah, it's one of those things where it's like I'm not hiding it under a bushel and pretending that I never did it, but it's definitely something that I want to move forward from.
well, that's a shame. Yeah, because I was going to suggest that it was almost even ahead of its time. In terms of the social justice movements that we're seeing.
Yeah. Well, and certainly with some of the topics that are more kind of public discourse now about things like consent and about things like, like the monster girlies and stuff who are kind of more interested in these enemies to lovers kind of stories. But when I
Hmm.
was writing it, there were a lot of questions about like, oh, well, they're a bad person and they've done bad things. And I'm like, yeah, they're all terrible people. So yeah, so it was definitely tough, and it was definitely one of those things where I think it comes into the question of, do you separate the artist from the art? Do you you don't have to agree with what your characters do? You can explore things that you would never do or that you don't condone, and that's a tough one to do. I think especially with online discourse right now, there's a lot of
Hmm.
people who don't look for that nuance or don't explore that nuance. They'll make, snap judgments about somebody because of something their character does.
Right.
And it's one of those things where when you write a story, you only get to control 40% of that story. 60% of it is however your reader takes it. And you have no say over how they take it. Everyone brings their own baggage to a story. Everyone, has their own touch points, their own cultural background, their own personal experiences that are going to color
Yeah.
how that story
Triggers.
comes across to them. Yeah. And that's just the reality of storytelling. You have to be okay with the fact that every person who reads your story is going to get a different story out of it, and you can only do so much to try to control what your intent is with it.
Right, that's fascinating. It's timely that you mentioned that because I was just reading a Reddit conversation this afternoon on Philip Pullman,
Oh
the
yeah.
author of His Dark Materials,
Hmm.
and the entire Reddit post was somebody trying to paint Philip as, and I think I call it sort of like the Neil Gaiman cancer,
Mm,
and basically they were, it was like they were grasping at straws, and I think, like you just said too, that a lot of the times readers can misread an author's intent and lack that ability to disconnect them from their real
yeah.
life, right? Not
Yeah, I
that I'm
mean,
defending Gaiman. I mean,
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, well, and it's difficult too because like there are people who they might be terrible people, and they have created beautiful art. And so for me it comes down to like, are they using the proceeds of their art to do terrible things, right? Like,
right.
and
Epstein
like, yeah, Rowling, somebody who's actively using the funds from their projects to,
and their platform. Yeah.
attack, yeah, and using their platform to intentionally attack a group of people. And that's something that I cannot support. And there's definitely like, I had a lot of Neil Gaiman's books, and there were a lot of advice pieces that he gave in previous like webinars and talks and stuff that I found very helpful as a writer. And they're even like, I used to quote him when I would give advice to people that, and now I'm like, ooh, I don't want the baggage. I want the connotation that comes along with that, because that's not the part that I want to talk about. So
Right. Yeah.
it is a difficult place because, people are flawed. And I think especially when you are successful, like Gaiman or Pullman, who have become very successful, I do think that you lose touch with reality a bit, and you get to a point where you do kind of believe the reputation that you've developed, even if it's, a persona that you're playing online and not actually who you are in your private life. So I do think it gets difficult for some people to really kind of tell the difference, or like realize when they've lost touch. um,
Right.
and if you are that successful, you don't have an excuse. Like, this is a moment for you to kind of go to therapy, listen when
Yeah.
people are like, hey, maybe this is some bad behavior you shouldn't be doing. But I
Yeah.
do think that it's like absolute power corrupts, and within a certain demographic, like if you're that kind of a rock star, it's common that somebody just kind of loses it. So
Yeah. It's an interesting point, like the further you get from the ground, the least understanding you have of the critters that live there, right? So,
yeah, your new normal becomes whoever you're surrounded by. And if that is, a higher echelon of people who, have more fame and money and whatever, like, you might not remember, or you might distort your memories of what it was like, being a little pleb. So yeah, we
yeah.
are all kind of colored by our experiences, and that is very real to us in the moment.
Yeah.
And on the one side, like, as writers, I think we're especially prone to that sort of disappearing into our own stories, because that's how we write good characters. It's how we write believable worlds. So yeah, I
Yeah.
think we do have a predisposition to just kind of disappear into the fantasy a bit.
I remember reading somewhere once, and I'm not sure if it was another interview with an author or if it was just a TED talk that I might have been idly watching one of those days when I was half asleep on the couch. But I remember that they were saying that authors tend to write stories that they wish they the world would be, like most of us who write fiction can read a grave injustice in the world, and we write from that lens. How do you feel about that? Like, do you feel that when you write your stories, you're writing from a I wish the world was this way?
I think that that can be true for some people. There was a great article by Tyler James Nichol in the Reactor magazine recently about unlikable characters and how to keep readers on board with unlikable characters. And he kind of broke it down into 5 reasons that a reader might be reading that. And, paraphrasing it very loosely, but it's like some of them are that escapist piece of like, oh well, it's the GTA, the Grand Theft Auto of like, I'll do all the horrible things that I would never do in real life. Sometimes it's the comeuppance piece where you're like, it's that Schadenfreude of like, oh yeah, this horrible person is going to get their comeuppance and they totally deserve it. And it's going to be satisfying to watch them fall. Like, so there are different goals for people when they're looking at problems, and whether that's in a character or in a social system. For me personally, I like to question why things are the way they are and how they could be different. So most of my stuff is fantasy, and a lot of that is second world fantasy where I don't have humans and I don't have the thousands of years of human history that have shaped the world as it is. So if you look at a world that has, in my case, multiple sapient species, it's not just humans competing against each other. You have other species that have different capabilities and different aptitudes that kind of keep you in check. You can't just be, this rapacious dominant species who doesn't care about the environment or whatever. Like, there are other species who have different needs that will kind of keep you in check. But also, they're not human. They've evolved from different animals, they have different values. And so then that questions some of the things that we sometimes take as default flaws in humanity, and we're like, oh well, that's just humans, we're cruel, or whatever negative
Hmm.
attribute you want to apply. And my question is always like, well, what if they weren't that way? What if they had more compassion? What kind of choices would they make? How would they choose things? What if they were more innately tied in with their environment and they felt it when that was damaged? Would they make different choices about technology or about environmentalism or development? So I like to explore not just what could be different in the world, but what would cause it to be different in the choices that people were making.
That's awesome. Yeah, so let's talk about Ulzareth.
Yeah.
So you and I have been friends since God. When did we meet, Astra? Like
It was at a
2008?
convention. Yeah, so I think it was 2008. It's You've been pretty much along for the ride for the entirety of my working on Ulzareth books, because I wrote Firstborn, which was my first Ulzareth novel. I wrote it in 2009, over the course of 3 days, because I decided I liked pain, and and but I
And pain
published
it
it.
was. Pain it
Oh
was.
yeah, it was, the 3-day novel contest, which I think is intended for, it's not intended for speculative fiction. It's intended for a 50,000 word novel, not a 75,000 word, dark fantasy. So, I wrote
Which
that one. Oh,
is
yeah.
on my shelf, is on my shelf.
Yeah.
So it made it into the world.
Yes, yeah, I published that one in 2015, so you were around for that journey, and that one was a smaller scope. It wasn't the first Ulzareth novel that I had written, but I had known the story of it for about 10 years before I actually sat down to write it. So when I did, I knew it very well. I knew the people in it very well, and it flowed. But there are like 14 different countries. There are at least that many languages. There are thousands of years of history in that world. And so my novels have been kind of putting a microscope on different parts of it. So different cultures, different time periods, different specific individuals who have caused change in that world, and following their choices and how the people and the world interplay with each other. So yeah, it's definitely been my passion piece and like the love of my life.
Yeah, and most recently, you've just re-released the first of the Prophet's Tale books, and it is a
Yeah.
stunning, stunning book. It's on my shelf, and I'm so proud to own one of the limited edition copies. It's absolutely stunning book.
I'm really happy with how it came out, because that trilogy was where my knowledge of the world started. It was one of those, stroke of lightning moments. A friend of mine brought back a quill and some red ink from the UK when they came back from vacation, and I was testing it out. It was my first time writing with a quill. I was really excited to finally have one, because I love all things old and antique, and my grandma core aesthetic. And the thing that I wrote, just completely free writing, was in my death, I sign Adderok. And I was like, who is this? What is happening? And it was just fully fleshed, the whole story, came into my head, and I spent the next 25 years learning about the world, recording conlang information, drawing maps, exploring
Yeah.
different cultures, and so after all of that work of learning more about the world and getting better at writing to be able to tell the story more authentically and with language and pronouns kind of developing and becoming more commonly understood, I was able to write some of the cultures more authentically. It was time to come back to that first story and use all of the editing knowledge that I've gotten my certification in that time, and come back and really polish it up and do it justice. So yeah, I feel confident with it now that it's where it needs to be, because it is the story that started it all, but it's also the foundation for a lot of stories that I want to tell next.
Yeah, well, that's yeah, man. I don't even know what to say about it. Like, you and world building are shockingly thorough. Guy Gavriel K, Tolkien level world building. When you build these worlds, you go right down to economy, culture,
Hmm.
dance, language, everything, right? And I
Yeah.
remember you once told me that you felt more like it's the word I'm looking for here. Like you felt more like you were witnessing this world, like you were
Yeah.
just recording it than
I refer to myself as a stenographer for sure, where I'm
right.
just trying
That's the
to
word.
capture as much as I can. And I always think of it like if an alien popped down and was like, "Tell me about Earth." What do you tell? Like what period of Earth, what cultures on Earth, what aspects do you try and whittle it down to explain a whole planet and all of its history to a newcomer? And Earth readers are my newcomers to this world, and I have to figure out a way to balance being authentic to that world while still making it accessible to them. And so there are definitely, I include glossaries in my books because I do use some of the conlangs that are in the world, and I include pronunciation guides, and I include meanings or definitions when I can, because I want it to be as immersive as possible. I want it to be a passport to Ulzareth. And some people, that's too much detail for them. And I write it in a way that you can still read it without having to flip to the glossary. It does have context and you can still understand it. But for the people like me who love being transported and love exploring other worlds, I do want all of that richness to be there so they can steep in it if they want to.
Yeah, it's a lot like reading a seven layer or like it's like eating a 7 course meal. Like
Yeah.
I'm just stuttering and losing
Mm.
myself here because it like you really need to experience Ulzareth to understand just how deep it actually goes, how immersive and impressive the world building actually is, to the point where, like you said yourself, it's almost a place that feels like you could taste and touch it,
Oh, I
from
wish I could.
firstborn on, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and like, for example, like Taste and Touch, like in Firstborn, I included a recipe, in Firstborn for fire tea because it's something that is culturally so important to the Muzena people. They like that's, a social gathering piece, it's a introduction piece, and so I included a kind of Earth equivalent recipe for it so that if you wanted to make some while you were reading the book, you could kind of really immerse yourself in it. And I kind of joke that someday I'll do a cookbook, of different like Ulzareth recipes and things. But the
That'd be
challenge there is,
awesome.
but there's a lot of foods that are not edible for humans, right? Like some of the things that they eat would be very toxic or very like unsanitary for us. So, yeah,
Rocks.
right. Well, I mean, yeah, like the Valnez with the
Yep.
high clay content of their diet. There are a lot of poisonous foods that the Talmontes eat. There are a lot of insects that the Badovians eat, and some of those are fine for humans to eat, but there are a lot of people who kind of turn their nose up at them. So, yeah, there is always this balancing piece between they're not human, and I think because we're so used to the Tolkien treatment where it's just a bunch of humans with some prosthetic ears that we forget that different species have different physiognomy. And so there are different things about how you evolved or how you exist in a world, especially a magical world, that are going to be very different from humans, and trying to shift into that mindset. For perception, I always think about some of the weird animals on Earth that have just very different perception than humans. And what does the world look like if you can perceive these things that humans can't? You think of like the full color spectrum that mantis shrimp can see in, or birds that that can see magnetic
Hmm.
fields,
Yeah.
or scorpions that feel through vibration. So yeah, there are a lot of those pieces that I try to anchor, but I think that a lot of human readers are going to come to it with a human lens and see them as just humans with fun names. So um, you
Yeah.
got you got
That's
to kind
all.
of accept that some people will just put the human lens on. Yeah.
That's always the problem with any spec fiction, there's that suspension of belief that has to occur in
Mm,
order for somebody to actually enjoy the story. But you touched
yeah.
on this point, and I want to explore it a little bit more.
Yeah.
Magic exists
Mhm.
in your world.
Mhm.
Magic is a core concept in a lot of high fantasy worlds, but you approached it in an absolutely fantastic way. Do you want to explain a little bit about how the
Yeah.
magic system in Ozareth works?
I mean, the core thing for me to understand the magic system initially was that it was a renewable resource. It was such an integral part of the world that it completely changed the development of society. So, for instance, in the Prophet's Tale books, they take place, in about 1,000 years previous to modern day in their world, and technology was a bit different for them. There was a higher rate of magic, more magic was being used, and so they were more likely to use more plentiful resources. So their weapons are bronze because they're infused with magic to make them durable. They're infused with runes to give them power. They don't need to spend the extra resources and the time and the effort to make something like steel. Whereas
Hmm.
there's another culture that uses less magic that does use steel because they don't have those supports. And so looking at, if you have a renewable resource like this, what technologies would you maybe not use, or what technologies would be considered inefficient to make if you're putting concrete resources into one thing and it can't be reused in other ways. And so in the more modern setting pieces, I've got a couple of short stories that have come out that touch on that, with having light factories where you have people generating magic that's used as utility. So it does change kind of your interplay with resources in the natural world, and how that's valued. But to really understand it for me, I decided to build a tabletop RPG because I
Hmm.
like gaming. And
Yeah,
that was a
I was hoping you'd
really,
mention that.
yeah, it was such a great way for me to understand not only how the magic system worked on a mechanical level, but also to give me a better understanding of the schools of magic, the different ways that it can be manifested, and also how that manifests in day-to-day life. Like what kind of careers and professions might be built around certain skills that you might learn or certain knowledge you might have access to. So yeah, I'm still building it. It's, this is why teams build tabletop games and not one person like me. But and I've rewritten the rules a couple of times to try and like simplify it and make it more accessible. But it was super helpful, and I frequently use my core book when I'm writing to double check my facts and make sure that I'm being consistent and accurate to the way that the magic works. So yeah, that's the kind of high level of it. Does that help?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely awesome. Yeah, I was really, like fascinated when I first read your work about the weave and how the
Hmm.
all of that kind of stuff. No, sorry, am I getting confused with D&D?
No, no, it's mana weave. Yeah, I refer to it as
Mana
weave
weave,
for
right?
short by shorthand, but yeah,
Yes,
it's the
yes,
mana weave and the husk line. It's
and the
two
husk line. Yeah.
facets. Yeah, two facets of reality. So the mana weave is, there are kind of rivers of it. This almost like concentrated magic of different elemental alignments that flow through everything that exists. So anything that is matter. Has mana weave in it, and a lot of magic also has mana weave as its kind of core principle. That's what it runs off of. That's what powers it. And Huskline is everything in between. So all of the space between the Manaweave rivers that run through the world and people and objects is this kind of cobweb possibility. So it's reality versus possibility. And that possibility, that void, gives you the potential to do things that physically aren't real, but they could be. And so that's a different form, a different source of power. And so the idea is that the Huskline isn't as strong as any one river of Manweave, but it's so much more plentiful. Like every time you make a choice, all the things you didn't choose branch off into Huskline. And so those two forces balance the realms of the world and also balance out how that magic is a renewable system. Um, and so, yeah, with Prophet's Tale, one of the things that I'm really exploring is what happens when you use too much and you break that renewable system.
Amazing. That's so cool. So, if anybody wanted to get started reading about Ulzareth or getting
Mhm.
into your work, where would you recommend they begin?
Well, if you're into short fiction, I have a couple of short fiction pieces out. So there is kind of modern day piece in Dusty Attic magazine that is called Essential Workers. So that's the one that deals with the using people for light factories. There is also a short fiction piece in the Vanthology that just came out from the Vancouver Genre Writers Group that is Frozen Places, and that one's a little bit longer, but that deals with some of the ghosts of the world and what happens when a long-lived race is killed before their time.
I
Um,
love that story,
so
by the way.
yeah,
I
yeah. So
love
those are
it.
two easy kind of accessible ways. Aside from that, if you're wanting to start with the novels, Firstborn is a really accessible one. It's a shorter novel. It is a smaller scope. It only deals with like three of the cultures, so it's less overwhelming if you're not super into second world fantasy. And it is a punchy, dark fantasy tale about a boy born under a curse. So that one is accessible. And if you like digging into second world fantasy and you want the kind of full experience, The Prophet's Tale, so the first book, Legend of the Quill, came out in March of this year. Battle of Heroes, which is book two, comes out March in 2026. And that one is the full, like, epic fantasy second world experience. It's an ensemble cast, it has the, wizards and necromancers and all of the good stuff.
Yeah, and for the listeners, Astra knows what's coming because I do this to
Yeah.
her all the time. But for the listeners out there, ladies and gentlemen, I am a pop culture nerd. You'll hopefully know that about me by now. I have experienced story since the earliest memories. And in Battle of Heroes, Astra introduces the most unsettling and terrifying antagonist that I have ever experienced. And I constantly call her out on it. They just make me shudder, and they are called
The
the
Gray.
Gray.
Yeah. Well, and I hope you enjoy the finished version of Battle of Heroes. I know you got to read kind of an earlier draft, but I've really punched the Gray up in this version. So every
Great.
time every time I do a scene with them, I think of you, and I'm just like, I hope this makes Kenton shiver.
Yeah, almost everything to do with the Gray makes me shiver. But
Yeah.
yeah, so where could people follow you and learn more about what you do? What's the best place?
Best place is probably my website. So that's astracrompton.com. And that one has not only information about the books and stories that I've done, both the freelance work that I've contributed to and also my own work, but that also does have some links to Ulzauerth information. So if you're interested in world building, kind of seeing what I've put into it, there are a bunch of links on my website there. Aside from that, I am also on various social media at Ulzauerth. I'm very haphazard in my posting. I take the ADHD method of when I'm feeling the joy, I post, and otherwise I don't.
Oh,
So I certainly won't
girl.
inundate you, but I'm active on mostly on Threads and Instagram these days, and also on Discord. So if anybody wants to chat world building, I'm in a few writers groups on Discord, and I'm also happy to chat in DMs if people have questions about specific world building stuff.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, Astra, you will be coming back. Astra will be a fairly frequent member of this show because, like, as I mentioned, we are best friends. We're literary
Hmm.
best buddies, besties.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I do this thing that you may be aware of. I might or might not have given you a heads up. I probably didn't, but I am going to be doing this thing from now on in all of my interviews where at the end of them I will ask you one more question.
Okay.
Are you ready for your one more question,
Uh,
Astra?
yeah. What do you got for
All
me?
right. All right. If Adarok,
Mm,
and Adarok being one of her main characters in
yeah.
your Olzarth books, if Adarok was forced to run a bake sale and his magic somehow caused all of his pastries to gain sentience, which
Mm.
pastry would cause the most chaos?
Here's the thing, Adderall, if it was a bake sale, would get extremely competitive. He's definitely the kind of person who, even for mild things, like if you splash him in the pool, watch out. He gets very competitive very quickly. So I think he would probably make some sort of very elaborate, like patisserie, sort of like French fancy like Paris Brest or something.
Of
So I think
course.
I think he would make something that would have very difficult techniques, and so that would make it very unstable and probably leave, like, heavy, rich whipping cream everywhere. That would be my guess. It would be very sticky and very messy.
A very sentient, sticky mess. Thank you, Adderall.
Yes.
All right, Astra Crompton, thank you for joining me today on more about storytelling. Very much looking forward to hearing more from you in the future.
I'm
Do you
happy
have
to be
any?
here. I love to talk story with you, so any topic, let me know. I'm happy to come back.
All right. And that, my friends, was Astra Crompton. Find more about her at www.astracrompton.com. And yeah, check her out. She's fantastic. She's a very smart, very, very talented artist and creator, and she is worth the follow. So that brings us to the end of our very first More About Storytelling episode. I hope you had a good time. There will be more to come in the future, more interviews, more talks about the pop culture that I am obsessed with. And yeah, here we go. Thank you for being a part of my journey. If you would want to learn more about me and my work, follow me at www.kentonjmoore.com. Google search me, look me up on social media, or find and follow me on Patreon. I would love your support. You can get a free short story every month. And please get a copy of Cloudbreakers Valen and embark on my steampunk sci-fi fantasy airship adventure based on my time in the Navy, which we'll be talking about in the future. So stay tuned. We've got more interviews coming up. And thanks for following More About Storytelling.
Fade to black. The end.